The predictions about the catastrophe
As another therapy for Ebola is already being tested on Americans with COVID-19, but it's still unclear when any of these treatments will be widely.
Well, this is awkward. We got that video started, but we have no need for the video today. Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of Coronavirus Resources for Printers. And my awkward pause is, if you were not already aware of it, if you did not pick up on the message on Tuesday, we actually wrapped up the end of the Coronavirus Resources for Printers webinar. And we wrapped that up on Tuesday. And kind of a bittersweet moment, actually, because we've just all been so passionate about doing everything we can to just be right in front of you, our subscribers, and really all printers during the coronavirus pandemic. But a lot of you are over the hump now. We just had that sense that this is the right time to wrap up our Coronavirus Resources for Printers webinar. And we are keeping on going with today's version, the Thursday version of the webinar. We are in a transition period. We don't know exactly what that's going to be called yet. We know it's not going to be called Coronavirus Resources for Printers anymore. We might go back to one of those things that we kind of talked about in just joking before. We might go to Thursdays with Trish now. So that might be the new name of our webinar. So Trish, we are here and we're going to talk about the workflow in just a moment. But before we transition over to that, I do want to remind everybody that all of the webinars we've had up until this point, Coronavirus Resources for Printers webinars, are on this page, coronavirusresourcesforprinters.com. They're all on here, and we will continue to make those available. We're in a period of transition time, so I'd still invite all of you to keep on coming back on Thursdays, just like you did today. Tuesdays webinars are done. Thursday's webinars are going to continue in one way or another. We're not sure the name. We're not sure exactly what that means and where those recordings are going to live yet, but we're at that transition point. So wanted to get that out there, and that's why we cut that video short to introduce the webinar. It's not needed anymore. We're here to talk about workflows. So Trish, let's turn it over today to you to tell our subscribers about the workflows tools in the website.
Sounds good. First of all, can you see my screen, Dave?
I see the Coronavirus Resources screen. Perfect. I do not see the webinar.
All right.
Workflow page. Here we go. Yeah.
All right. So as Dave alluded to, we're going to kind of go over workflow, and he's going to help track the time to make sure I don't go too far deep, but we'll see how deep we do get today. So for our subscribers, on the back end of your website in the Control Center, there is a workflow tab. When you first click on that workflow tab, you may or may not see as much or as little as I do, because as we know, everyone has a different amount of orders, excuse me, and jobs that come into your print shop. What I'm going to focus on, and I have my list here, is first let's go over how to run, I guess, what I could consider basic reports. If you come in here right off the bat, the system defaults to the View Workflow tab. And that's where I'm going to focus today. That's the meat and potatoes of the workflow tab. That's where most of what you would want to see and what you want to do would happen in the View Workflow tab. If you're not seeing as much as you would expect to see, what I first double check is under this Categories tab here on the left. If it is minimized, you can select the arrow to open it up. Go ahead and select either active items or completed items. You may or may not have items in your completed items. That is if you actually mark complete your jobs and orders. If you select active items, you're going to see in your list if there are estimates, if there are files that have come in, if you have orders in production, the different statuses that you may have moved a job around, and I don't know if I'll get into that today. But the inactive category on the left here is probably the one that you want to click on. And this is where you're going to see kind of a snapshot of what's going on as far back as, and I think the system defaults to 3 months from today, 2 or 3 months. So right now, from April 11th to today, these are all the jobs that I have in my print shop, and I have 2 pages. You can determine if you want to see 20, 40, or 60 line items per page. So real quick, perhaps you want to print or export a CSV file of your workflow of what you're seeing right now. If you scroll down into the lower right, there is a printer icon and there is a downward arrow over a file icon. The printing icon will do just that. It would allow you to print. If you can see my screen now, some folks maybe they want to print off their workflow. Here's a snapshot of how that looks right before I print that. What I have seen more popular, or what might work better depending on, is this download arrow. I'm sorry, this downward arrow over that file. That will allow you to open up a CSV, which in essence opens up in the Excel software program. So taking this data that you see on the screen and bringing it into, downloading it into Excel, allows you to manipulate the data a little bit better. You can go ahead and turn on your filters for your columns. You can decide if you want to left, right, justify all the data. You can make the columns a little bit wider depending on how much or how little you work in Excel. So there's a lot more that can be done here, but you could always, again, turn on a filter if you want to filter by who ordered it. Maybe you want to filter by the activity date. And I'll get more into that in a minute. But bringing in Excel allows you to do a little bit more, and of course you could always print from Excel if you want. So we want to make sure to let you know that you can export a report into Excel with this downward arrow button, and or you can print off the data.
And that
So
data,
that's
a really good thing to point out too, because that left column or the items in that left column really allows you to really dial in exactly the information you want on that report. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, looking over someone's shoulder when the question was asked, how can I find my obligation for my sales tax when I'm preparing a sales tax report? How can I show the amount of sales tax that the website's e-commerce tools have provided? And just happened to be that was a question that came in yesterday, even though we had this topic planned. It just bleeds in really nicely to what you're showing. So maybe you want to just even show that, Trish, how we can, if you needed to find a quarterly sales tax report, how would that happen?
Yep, and I was gonna get into that, so I'm glad you brought that up so I don't forget. But just as I had mentioned earlier, the categories, depending on what you select here, not categories, I'm sorry, the view columns. Depending on what you select under view columns, those are the columns that show up in this view here. So right now I have job number, description, and so forth. If you, for instance, want to run a tax report, there is a sales tax column that you can check mark, and that will show up. If I go up here and I scroll over to the right, and I don't know how much sales tax I'll have show up in here, but here's the handy little sales tax column that now shows up. And if I scroll down, I have a couple here that do have sales tax. To go a little bit further, if you want to find out sales tax, let's say for a particular client of yours over a particular time frame, a little bit further down on the left under view columns is dates and people. So depending on what you want to do, let's say you want to know the sales tax for a particular print shop, or I'm sorry, one of your customers over since say January 1st of this year. Under your dates, you can go back as far as you need to. That data will go back as far as that first order that you have in your print shop. So you can go back to say 2000 if that's when you first started using the workflow. I have not seen a limit, so hopefully what I said is true, but I have seen the dates go back to say 2014, 2013 before, so I'm certain you can go back further. We'll just put it at 01/01/2020, and I drill down to a particular client of mine. Now I might not have as much, they might not have ordered as much, and that's fine, but if we scroll over, you'll still see that sales tax column is still there. And so you can go ahead and just like I showed you prior, you can export a CSV, or you could do a print out of the lines that are now showing up on your screen for workflow. I just did that again, now that I'd added in that sales tax column, and depending again how much you want to work with Excel and expand activity, here you go. You could even highlight everything. You could get a total that shows up at the bottom. You could start throwing in a formula if you want to have an extra row here that has a column for sales tax. But this is one way, or really the best way, that you can export to see your sales tax, whether it's over a defined period and or for a specific customer of yours.
So I know this is your sandbox data, but I find it interesting that it looks like the only person paying sales tax appears to be your daughter. So she's not paying
That would be true. My
sales
youngest
tax.
daughter is paying sales tax on some of her orders, it looks like. But I would suspect for your customers that are not tax exempt that this would be filled in for them.
Great.
So good point. And to kind of go a little bit further again, I'm going to leave categories at active. I'm going to minimize that. But let's say you want to know maybe what branch placed the order. Maybe they have a purchase order that they entered in, you need to know. There could be a shipping price. Maybe you need to know the shipping method. All of these columns or the check marks that I'm placing, as soon as you check that, payment type, payment status, they will show up from left to right. So if I scroll over a little bit and I kind of go up here, there's that shipping price that I added. Here's that shipping method, whatever they chose on your order form, if that was an option, or when they go to checkout, I'm sorry, if you have something set up for shipping, what's your payment method that they chose, what's the payment status of the order. So these columns will start showing up on the right-hand side as you select them here on the left under View Columns. So as many or as little that you need to see, go ahead and feel free to select those. And again, these dates, and I'm going to go back just a couple years and see what else comes up, but you can go back as far as need be. One thing that I want to point out is you can either select and run a report based on active items or any orders and jobs and so forth that you have marked as completed. So those are the two distinctions I wanted to make sure to let you know. But of course, let's say you want to run a report on only what are the files that have been received into your print shop. You don't care about the actual order or the estimate, but what is a file that has come in organically from the send a file option on your website, received unattached to orders? I've got a couple here that show up. Maybe you just want to see estimates that have been requested. These are not orders that are in production. These are not files that have been sent. These are estimates that have been requested. You would select requested under estimates. Maybe you want to see the estimates that are waiting for your customer to respond to. Waiting for customer response. I've got a couple that I'm waiting for my customer here to reply back to me. Another neat thing that I've heard a couple folks ask, what about the abandoned cart syndrome, or where folks place items in their cart and they don't seem to check out fully? Well, under orders, there is an unsubmitted in cart radio button. If you select that, any and all, and I don't have any here, at least not for these time frames, but if I maybe select all of my customers, any and all orders that are in a cart that have not been processed as an order by them are showing up. So now that I have 4 that I added other customers that I can see, I do have 4 orders that are in the shopping cart and have not been submitted. So this might help you see if there's a trend or a specific customer or whatever it might be, what's sitting out there that has not been submitted. So I want to make sure to let you folks know that that is an option. And again, orders.
That's a really important point, and I'm glad you brought that one up too, because humans will be what humans are, and they don't always do things the way they should, and leaving those orders dangling in the shopping cart, that's a big deal. And so that might be a good reminder for you as the printer, just to check that out, maybe as frequently as once a day. You could have an opportunity to train your customers and say, hey, you might want to hit that place an order button to remind them of that. Or that's a sales tool too. You know, they might think they placed an order and they'd eventually realize, hey, I haven't heard from Tim in a while, so I need to go and check that out. But you can proactively be there for them. That's a really good point, Trish. I'm glad you brought that one up, because that's a very powerful part of the workflow.
Yeah, David, thank you for expanding on that. And then just like I've shown you with other categories and so forth, depending on what you have in the list here, you could certainly export a CSV or print off if that would help you further, process the data or what have you. So the unsubmitted cart's a really important one, just to remember that it's there if you ever want to see what's floating out there. And then if you want to see proofs that are waiting for your customer response or show all, whether you're waiting for them or it's with them to get back to you, you can say show all for proofs, and I have quite a few here going on, as you can see. And then last but not least, design edit projects has its nice little own category. I don't think I have any for any of my customers right now, which is fine. But if you have any design edit projects out there, that would be populated here in the workflow if you had any that have come in. So that's kind of nice to, if you want to not have it show up in all the active, but you want to have its own little category, you can do that similar to files received. You don't want to necessarily merge everything into one considered active. You could select design edit projects.
So we do want to keep this open for questions too. We're covering a lot of information
A
here.
lot of
And
data.
I know we had a few ideas of things that we wanted to talk about, which are not going to fit in the time frame that we have today. But I do want to encourage you, if you are listening in and you do have a question, please use that questions tool in the webinar, and we will answer those questions live if we can, or certainly come around afterwards and make sure you get your questions answered too.
Yep, definitely. Thank you for that. And yes, we welcome any and all questions. And a couple other things that I'm still going to point out here is there is also the ability to search by keyword. And again, it's dependent on your date time frames you have selected. It's dependent if you're drilled down to a company or not. It's dependent on the columns that you have selected. But you could certainly search for a keyword in your workflow, whether it's, say, order forms or, oh, I remember that job name, but I don't know who emailed it to me. You know, maybe your email, you can't find the email. You can go through down here under keywords and search all order info for, say, the word business card or sherry or whatever the case is. You can decide to only search in the product description. Maybe you only want to search in the job specs only. So there's 3 different options to search for a keyword as well, which might be helpful depending, again, on what you're trying to find or what you're looking for. All right, one other thing that I want to show you, and I'm going to refresh and see what workflow shows as far as the default and everything. I have active, I have completed. I want to get some data to show up here so that we can get this going. And if I click on my tab again, you may have heard or seen what's considered global questions showing up in workflow. And so I won't get too deep in here, but if I scroll to the right on my workflow screen, I have a bunch of additional columns over here. How soon is this needed? It's called aqueous coding. It's called folding options, hold drilling, and so forth. What's nice is these are considered global questions. We have set up where you can show global questions on your workflow. And if I still have these called up and I scroll to the right, these global questions do show up, as you can see over here in columns P through Y. I have global questions showing up in my export of my workflow. So just a quick overview, and we'll get more deeper into that maybe next weekend. But global questions, you have the option to show in workflow reports. They show up to the right of the columns that you select under view columns, but it might be a very handy tool to see what were the answers to those global questions as those orders and estimates and so forth come in. So it's another important little tool that we put in here last year, maybe earlier this year, that we'll get in deeper if we have the time. But it sounds like it's been very effective.
I know that was a more recent addition that was very well received. It was kind of a very elegant solution to the question that some of our customers, some of our subscribers had is, can you make it so that this specific question shows up on the workflow? And prior to this, the answer was, I wish we could, but no. And now with the ability to bring any global question, and that might be the only form that uses that one global question, but if it's a global question, it can now show up on this workflow report. It's a very kind of very elegant solution that our development team put into play here. But I think you're right, Trish. I think that's a topic that we will save for the next time around, because we are at the end of today's webinar. Even though we created an extra 35 seconds or so by shaving off that video on the front end, we still managed to fill the time. So we will leave it at that today. Just as a reminder, if you happen to join us late, the Coronavirus Resources for Printers webinar series has come to an end, but we're continuing with the Thursday version of that, which everyone is invited to. Just where we dial in a little bit more focused on our subscribers. So we thank you for showing up today. I invite you to come back next week. We'll dig into that workflow more. Thanks, Trish, for all you're doing to bring on the knowledge.
All right. Thank you, Dave. You guys take care. Bye.